Okay, so close your eyes for a sec and imagine this. You're about to talk to a whole room full of people. Maybe it's a big presentation at work or, a toast at a wedding or even just sharing an idea at a meeting. You know that feeling, right? That flutter in your stomach, little shaky hands.
Yeah.
Those pre-speech jitters. We've all been there, I think. For a lot of us, it's like something we dread, something we try to squash down. But what if, and just hear me out on this, what if that anxiety was actually like your secret weapon to becoming a better communicator? Today, we're going deep into this kind of surprising link between anxiety and communication and how instead of fearing it, we can actually use it to our advantage. We're going to reframe your whole view of those butterflies because they might just be the wind beneath your wings.
It's really interesting how we've come to see anxiety as this totally negative thing, especially when we're talking about communication. But communication anxiety, or glossophobia as it's technically known, is super common.
Oh, wow. Glossophobia. It sounds serious.
Yeah. Well, it's more common than you think. Studies show something like 75% of people experience it in some degree.
Wow, 75%. So if you're feeling those nerves, you're definitely not alone. It's not some weird personal thing. It's basically a universal human experience. But why is it so common? What is it about talking to people that makes us so anxious?
Well, to understand that, I think we need to look at the three main types of symptoms: physical, mental, and emotional.
Okay.
Physically, you might have things like a racing heart, sweaty palms, even a dry mouth.
Yes, the dry mouth.
Yeah.
It's like my body just forgets how to make saliva when I have to speak in public. Why does that happen?
It all comes down to our brains like ancient wiring. Even though public speaking isn't actually dangerous in the way that, say, encountering a predator is,
Right.
our brains kind of see it as a threat, and that triggers that old fight or flight response.
So we're basically reacting to a PowerPoint presentation like it's a saber-toothed tiger.
Basically, yeah. And that rush of adrenaline that helped our ancestors run away from danger is now making our hearts race and our palms sweat when we're just trying to give a presentation.
It's kind of funny when you think about it. Our bodies are gearing up for a physical fight when the real challenge is mental and emotional. Connecting with people, getting our ideas across, and, hopefully not embarrassing ourselves in the process.
Yeah.
No wonder our thinking gets all fuzzy when we're nervous.
Exactly. But here's the interesting part. What if instead of trying to crush those feelings of anxiety, we could actually learn to use them to help us?
Wait, hold on. You're saying we should embrace the jitters? Lean into those nerves? I gotta admit, that sounds a little strange. How does that even work?
It's a concept based on what's called the ironic process.
Okay.
The harder we try to suppress a thought or feeling, the stronger it often gets.
Oh, it's like when someone tells you, don't think about a pink elephant, and suddenly that's all you can think about.
Exactly. And it's the same with anxiety. Fighting it just makes it stronger. So the first step is just acknowledging it, accepting that it's there, and then shifting our focus away from trying to make it go away.
Okay, I get that. But if we're not trying to get rid of the anxiety, what are we supposed to do with it?
This is where the magic happens. We can actually reframe those nerves as a sign of something good. Passion, engagement, and a real desire to connect with the people we're talking to.
So instead of feeling embarrassed about those butterflies, we can actually see them as a sign that we care about what we're saying and who we're saying it to.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool way to look at it.
It is. Because in the end, communication is about connection. And anxiety often comes from that same desire to connect, to be understood, and to make a positive impact.
I'm starting to see how thinking about those nerves differently can actually be empowering. But how do we go from just noticing the anxiety to actually using it to become better communicators?
One powerful approach is to cultivate presence. And presence isn't about being perfectly calm and composed. It's about being fully present in the moment with all your emotions and engaging with your message and your audience in a genuine way.
I like that definition of presence because it takes the pressure off of having to seem totally perfect and in control. It's more about being real, even if you have a little nervous energy.
Exactly. It's about embracing those nerves as part of who you are and letting them fuel your passion and your connection with the people you're talking to.
I'm thinking about those really captivating speakers. The ones who own the room, not because they're totally polished, but because they're so clearly invested in what they're sharing. They might have a little tremor in their voice or fidget a bit, but it just makes them more relatable, more human.
That's a perfect example. Think of a storyteller who's completely lost in their tale. They might be nervous, but their passion keeps you on the edge of your seat. That's presence in action. It's about being authentic and engaged, even with those jitters there.
Okay, I'm starting to get excited about this whole embracing the jitters thing. But practically speaking, How do we actually get better at being present? Are we talking years of meditation and self-reflection?
It can be simpler than that. Mindfulness exercises like the body scan can be really helpful. And active listening is key. Instead of focusing on your own anxieties, you really focus on what the other person is saying, paying attention to their tone, their body language.
So it's about shifting the focus outward, away from our own worries.
Yeah.
And toward really connecting with the people we're talking to. That makes sense.
Exactly. And when we do that, we start to see communication not as a performance we need to nail, but as a shared experience, a dialogue, a real exchange of ideas. And that can be incredibly freeing.
This is already changing how I think about communication anxiety. Instead of seeing it as this enemy we have to conquer, we can actually see it as an ally, a source of energy and passion that can make our communication more impactful. And that brings us to the next important element, crafting clear, compelling messages. Because when we have a strong message that we really believe in, it can actually help reduce those pre-speech jitters.
It's like having a roadmap for your communication. When you know where you're going, you're less likely to get lost along the way. And that can definitely ease those nerves.
Absolutely. And there are some really good techniques for structuring your message in a way that makes it clearer and reduces anxiety. One approach is the content block method.
Content block, what's that?
It's about breaking your message down into separate parts. You start with a story that grabs your audience's attention and sets the context. Then you move to a study or piece of evidence that supports your point. And finally, you illustrate it all with a concrete example that brings it to life.
Okay, so it's not just throwing out a bunch of random ideas. It's about giving your audience a clear structure to follow. I can see how that would make the whole thing feel less overwhelming for both the speaker and the listener.
Exactly. And this leads us to the concept of backward mapping.
Backward mapping. Yeah. Start by thinking about what you want your audience to take away from your communication. What's the goal? Then work backward from there, building your message to achieve that specific goal.
It's like planning a road trip. You wouldn't just hop in the car and start driving without a destination. You'd pick where you want to go first and then map out the best route to get there. I can see how that approach would make communication feel much more manageable even when you're feeling nervous.
Exactly. When you know exactly where you're going and how you're going to get there, it boosts your confidence and reduces that feeling of being lost or overwhelmed. A clear, well-structured message helps reduce anxiety in a lot of ways.
I'm curious, how exactly does having a well-structured message help with those pre-speech jitters?
Well, first, it reduces your cognitive load.
Okay.
You're not struggling to remember what comes next or worrying about going off on tangents. Second, it boosts your confidence because you have a solid plan in place. And finally, it lets you anticipate potential questions, which can really help ease those pre-presentation nerves.
That makes a lot of sense. Feeling prepared definitely boosts your confidence, and confidence is a powerful way to combat anxiety. So we're managing our internal state by reframing those nerves and building a clear, structured message. But what about the external factors, like the audience?
That brings us to one of the most important parts of good communication, being audience-centric. It's about understanding that communication isn't about you, the speaker. It's about serving the needs of the people you're talking to.
It's like giving a gift. You wouldn't give the same present to everyone, right?
Yeah.
You think about their interests, their needs, their preferences. Communication is similar. You need to tailor it to the person you're talking to.
Exactly. Empathy is key here, putting yourself in your audience's shoes. What do they already know about this topic? What are their concerns? What kind of language and examples will connect with them best?
You know, I bet taking this audience-centric approach actually helps with communication anxiety too. It's less about me and my performance and more about helping the people I'm speaking to, giving them something valuable, something that will resonate with them.
It's a powerful shift because when we focus on the needs of our audience, we're less self-conscious, more focused on making a real connection. And that change in focus can really ease those pre-speech jitters.
This is all making so much sense. We're learning to think about our anxiety differently, structure our message effectively, and connect with our audience in a meaningful way. But what about those times when our message feels too abstract, too conceptual? How do we bring it to life in a way that really resonates with our audience?
That's a great question, and it brings us to the importance of making your message real. It's about moving from abstract ideas to tangible examples, stories, and visuals. Our brains are wired to remember concrete, vivid details.
Okay, so it's not about adding fluff or trying to be entertaining. There's a real reason why stories and visuals make communication more impactful and memorable. But can you give us some specific examples of how we can make this realness happen?
Absolutely. Let's say you're trying to explain a pretty dry concept like efficiency. Instead of just defining it in abstract terms, Tell a story about a time when you saw efficiency in action either in your own life or at work. Ah, I see. So instead of just saying efficiency is important, we might share a story about a time when a streamlined process saved our company a bunch of time or money. Or maybe a personal story about how we reorganized our workspace to be more productive.
Exactly. By grounding the concept in a real-world example that people can relate to you, make it more understandable, more memorable, and honestly, more interesting.
And what about visuals? How can we use those to make our communication better?
Think about how you could visually show that efficiency example. Maybe a simple before and after chart showing the huge time savings from that streamlined process. Or if you're telling a personal story, maybe a picture of your newly organized and efficient workspace.
I can already see how much more engaging that would be than just saying, we're all about efficiency in a flat monotone voice. The visuals add another layer of meaning and help the audience connect with the idea on a deeper level. You're getting it. And the best part is when you're caught up in telling a compelling story or explaining a visual concept, you're less focused on your own anxieties and more focused on connecting with your audience and bringing your message to life.
This is incredible. It feels like we're uncovering a whole new side of communication.
Yeah.
But let's be real. There's one part of this whole thing that many people dread, the dreaded Q&A session.
Yes, the Q&A. It can be a major source of anxiety for a lot of people, but it doesn't have to be. We can actually reframe questions as a valuable choice to engage more deeply with our audience and clarify our message even more.
Oh, I like that. Reframing questions as opportunities instead of threats.
Huh.
But I have to admit, I've had times where a tough question totally threw me off. How do we handle those curveballs gracefully, especially when we're already feeling nervous?
The key is to remember that most questions, even the tough ones, come from a place of genuine curiosity or a desire to understand your message better.
So instead of seeing them as attacks, we can see them as inquiries, as invitations to connect on a deeper level.
Exactly. And active listening is crucial here. Really hear what the person is asking, not just planning your response in your head while they're still talking. Pause before answering. And if you don't know the answer, it's perfectly okay to say.
That's a great question. Let me get back to you on that. Always thank the person for their question.
I'm really appreciating these practical tips because I think the Q&A is where a lot of people's anxiety really goes through the roof. But what about those really hostile questions, the ones meant to put you on the spot, undermine your message, or make you look bad? How do we handle those gracefully without letting our nerves get the best of us?
Those can be tricky, but there are ways to navigate them skillfully. One technique is to reframe loaded questions, focusing on the facts and avoiding getting pulled into an emotional debate.
So taking the high road, staying calm, and not letting the other person's energy control our response.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to answer every question. If it's a relevant off-topic or clearly meant to provoke, you can politely defer or redirect the conversation. That's reassuring to know. It's like we're gaining a sense of control over what used to feel like a very unpredictable and anxiety-inducing part of communication.
Precisely. And speaking of control, one often overlooked aspect of managing communication anxiety is the power of movement.
Movement? Are you suggesting I need to become a marathon runner to be a good speaker? Because I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of commitment.
Not at all. It's about finding joyful movement that works for you. It could be walking, dancing, yoga, swimming, even gardening.
Wait, gardening? How can gardening possibly help with communication anxiety?
You might be surprised by the strong connection between our physical and mental states. Physical activity, even gentle forms, releases endorphins, which have mood-boosting effects. It also helps regulate cortisol, the stress hormone that often spikes when we're anxious. And rhythmic movements like walking or dancing can actually help calm the nervous system.
So it's not just about physical fitness. It's about creating a physiological state that's more conducive to calm, focused communication. I'm starting to see the connection.
And mindful movement practices like yoga or Tai Chi can be especially helpful. They increase body awareness, which is key to recognizing and managing the physical sensations of anxiety.
I'm really intrigued by this whole movement piece. It's not something I'd thought about before in the context of communication anxiety. But let's get practical. Let's say I have a big presentation coming up. What are some specific pre-presentation movement rituals that I could try?
Something as simple as a brisk walk can make a big difference. It gets your blood flowing, clears your head, and releases nervous energy. Gentle stretching can also help, especially focusing on areas where you tend to hold tension, like your shoulders and neck.
I can definitely feel my shoulders creeping up towards my ears when I'm stressed.
Deep breathing exercises are also great, especially when combined with movement.
This is all so helpful. It feels like we've covered so much ground already.
We have, and we've
Yeah.
only just scratched the surface of how we can turn those dreaded jitters into our communication allies.
Listeners, stick with us as we keep going deeper into the world of communication anxiety and explore even more strategies for turning those nerves into a source of power and connection.
So we've talked a lot about the mental side of handling communication anxiety, reframing those nerves, understanding the audience, crafting a clear message.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing how much our mindset can affect how our bodies react.
Yeah.
We talked about the benefits of presence, but I feel like there's a piece of that whole being present thing that we haven't really explored yet.
You're right. We touched on things like the body scan and active listening, but there's another really powerful tool for cultivating presence that we need to talk about.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's this secret weapon for presence?
It's something we do all the time without even realizing it. It's our breath.
Breath work. I've heard of that, but I always thought it was more for like meditation or relaxation.
Yeah.
How does it connect to communication?
Our breath is directly tied to our nervous system. When we get anxious, our breathing tends to get shallow and fast. It's part of that fight or flight response we were talking about.
Oh, right. Like when you're about to give a presentation and suddenly you realize you're practically hyperventilating.
Exactly. But here's the cool part. We can actually use our breath to consciously control our nervous system and shift out of that anxious state.
So by changing how we breathe, we can actually change how we feel.
Exactly. Deep belly breathing, where you use your diaphragm as you inhale, tells your brain that everything is okay, that you're safe and you can relax.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually do this when it matters most? Like if I'm about to go on stage and I feel those nerves kicking in, should I just stop and do a bunch of breathing exercises?
You don't necessarily have to stop everything and meditate. Even a few conscious breaths can help.
So just taking a moment to breathe deeply and intentionally before I start talking.
Exactly. Here's a simple thing you can try. Put one hand on your chest and the other on your stomach. As you breathe in, imagine filling your belly with air like you're inflating a balloon. Your chest should stay pretty still. Breathe out slowly and feel your belly deflate.
I'm actually trying that right now. It really is calming.
It's a powerful tool, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. You can even work it into your daily routine, doing a few minutes of deep breathing each day.
I'm interested to see how all of this fits together. We're managing our inner state with techniques like breath work and mindfulness, and at the same time, we're focusing outward, understanding our audience, and putting together a clear, engaging message.
That's a great way to put it. It's a holistic approach, dealing with both the internal and external stuff that feeds into communication anxiety.
And speaking of external factors, we've talked about understanding our audience, but is there more to it? Is there anything else we can do to make the communication environment more positive and receptive?
That's a great question, and it brings us to a really important element that we haven't touched on yet, the physical space itself.
The physical space, you mean like the room where I'm giving the presentation? I hadn't really thought about that as a factor in communication anxiety.
It might seem like a small thing,
Yeah.
but our surroundings can actually have a big impact on how we feel mentally and emotionally.
So you're saying that the environment we're in can affect how nervous we feel?
Absolutely. Think about it. How do you feel in a cramped, messy room with bright lights and uncomfortable chairs?
Not very relaxed or focused, for sure.
Exactly. Now imagine a spacious room with natural light, comfy seating, and maybe some calming things like plants or soft music.
That sounds way more inviting and like a better place to communicate.
Right. We're not always in control of the spaces we have to communicate in, but there are things we can do to make the environment better, even if it's just small adjustments.
Like what kind of adjustments?
If you're giving a presentation, get there early and check out the room. See if you can adjust the lighting to make it more welcoming.
So dim the harsh overhead lights and maybe use lamps or natural light if possible.
Exactly. And think about the temperature, too. A room that's too hot or too cold can be distracting and uncomfortable for both you and your audience.
Oh, yeah. I've been in presentations where I was so cold I could barely pay attention to what the speaker was saying.
Sure. And it can go the other way, too. A stuffy, overheated room can make people sleepy and less engaged.
So making sure the temperature is comfortable is a simple but important thing to consider. What else?
Think about how the chairs are arranged. If you have control over it, set them up in a way that encourages people to talk and connect.
So maybe a semicircle or a U shape instead of rows of chairs all facing a stage.
Exactly. That kind of setup can make people feel more like they're part of a conversation rather than just passive listeners.
I can see how that would create a more relaxed and engaging atmosphere. What about if I'm presenting online?
If you're presenting virtually, pay attention to your background. Clutter or distractions back there can take away from your message.
So no piles of laundry or dirty dishes in the background of my Zoom calls.
Right. A clean, uncluttered background helps people focus on you and what you're saying. You can even use virtual backgrounds to create a more professional or visually appealing setting.
I'm starting to realize that these little details can actually make a big difference in how we feel and how our message comes across.
Absolutely. It's all about making an environment that supports good communication and reduces anxiety for both the person speaking and the audience.
This is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already thinking about how I can use these ideas for my next presentation. But before we move on, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, the power of storytelling. We talked about how stories create emotional connections and make messages more memorable. But I'm wondering if there's a specific type of story that's especially effective when it comes to communication anxiety.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It brings us to a type of story that's super powerful but often overlooked. The vulnerability story.
Vulnerability story, what's that?
It's a story where you share something personal, the time when you felt vulnerable, maybe a failure, a challenge you overcame, or a fear you faced.
Wait, so I'm supposed to share my weaknesses and insecurities with my audience? That doesn't seem like a good idea. Wouldn't that make me look less credible?
It might seem that way, but research actually shows that vulnerability makes you more credible and helps you connect better.
Really? How come?
When we share our vulnerable sides, we show our audience that we're human, that we make mistakes and face challenges just like they do. It makes us more relatable and people trust us more.
So it's about being authentic,
Yeah,
showing that we're not trying to act perfect.
exactly. And it takes courage to be vulnerable, especially at work. When we show that courage, it shows our audience that we're confident enough to be ourselves.
I'm still a little unsure, though. What if people judge me or think less of me if I share my vulnerabilities?
It's a valid concern. But here's the thing. People are usually much more understanding and supportive than we think.
So it's about trusting our audience, believing that they'll connect with our authenticity.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to spill your deepest, darkest secrets. Choose a story that feels okay for you to share something relevant to your message and that you think will resonate with your audience.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better. But how do I know if a vulnerability story is right for a specific situation?
It depends on the context. If you're giving a formal presentation to a board of directors, you might pick a more professional vulnerability story. Maybe a time when you messed up but learned something valuable.
So something that shows growth and resilience.
Right. But if you're talking to a group of colleagues or peers, you might choose a more personal story, something that shows your human side and helps you connect with them.
I'm starting to see how powerful vulnerability stories can be. They create a connection that goes beyond just the words.
Exactly. And they can be really helpful in dealing with communication anxiety. When we're open and authentic, we're less worried about being perfect and more focused on connecting with the people we're talking to.
This has been so insightful. I'm feeling inspired to start using vulnerability stories in my communication.
That's great. And remember, the key is to be genuine. Choose stories that feel true to you and that you think will connect with your audience.
I'm definitely feeling more confident about using storytelling to manage anxiety and make my communication more engaging. But you know what else can be a total game changer when it comes to those pre-communication jitters?
I'm listening. What is it?
It's something I've been trying lately, and it's made a huge difference in how I feel before those big communication moments.
Okay, you've got my attention. Now you have to tell me.
It's all about the power of ritual. Creating little routines before you have to communicate that help you get in the right mindset and calm those nerves.
Yeah.
It's all about ritual.
Yeah.
You know, creating these little routines before you have to communicate that help you get in the right headspace and calm those nerves.
Rituals. That's interesting. Tell me more about what you've been doing.
Well, for me, it's about creating like a sense of, familiarity and control in a situation that can feel really unpredictable and anxiety-inducing. So before a big presentation, I have this whole sequence of things I do to prepare both mentally and physically.
So you're basically setting your mind and body up for success with these rituals.
Totally. It's like sending a signal to my nervous system that's like, okay, we got this. We're ready. It's similar to what athletes do before a game. They have those warm-up routines that help them get in the zone.
That's a great comparison. Just like a physical warm-up gets your body ready, a pre-communication ritual gets your mind and emotions ready. What kind of rituals have worked for you?
It depends on the situation and how much time I have, but some common things are like mindfulness practices, getting my body ready, listening to music, and visualization.
Okay, let's break those down. What kind of mindfulness practices do you use?
Sometimes I'll do a short meditation or some deep breathing exercises. Other times it's just taking a few moments to sit quietly and focus on my breath. just bringing my attention to the present moment. The main thing is to quiet the mental chatter and get out of that anxious headspace.
I like that, creating that sense of calm and focus. What about getting your body ready? What does that look like for you?
It could be anything that gets me moving and my blood flowing. Sometimes it's a quick walk. Other times it's some light stretching or yoga. Even just standing up and rolling my shoulders a few times can help release tension.
It's amazing how even small movements can shift our energy and loosen up those tight muscles. What about music? How does that fit in?
Music is like a superpower for your mood. I make playlists of songs that make me feel confident and powerful and inspired. Listening to those songs while I'm getting ready helps me get in the right mindset.
It's like making a soundtrack for your success. I love it. And what about visualization? How does that work into your ritual?
Before a big presentation or meeting, I'll close my eyes and visualize myself doing great. I picture myself standing tall, speaking clearly and confidently, connecting with the audience, and feeling that sense of accomplishment.
So it's not just seeing a positive outcome, it's about embodying it, feeling it like it's already happening.
Yeah, exactly. Using all my senses in the visualization, I'll see myself standing there, hear my voice loud and clear, feel the energy of the room, and even imagine the positive feedback I'll get afterwards.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like creating a mental map for success.
It really is. And the cool thing about rituals is you can totally personalize them. You can make them fit your own preferences and needs.
Exactly. If someone loves aromatherapy, they could use essential oils in their ritual. Or if they're a visual person, maybe they could create a vision board with images that represent their communication goals.
I love that. It's all about finding what works for you and creating a routine that feels both empowering and calming.
And I think this idea of ritual connects really well with another important part of handling communication anxiety, accepting imperfection.
Oh, right. That whole perfectionism trap that so many of us get stuck in. The need to be perfect to give a flawless performance. It can really mess up our communication.
Yeah, it's like our inner critic takes over and starts telling us we're not good enough, that we're going to screw up, that everyone's going to judge us.
And that kind of negative self-talk can be so destructive. It feeds our anxiety and stops us from connecting authentically with our audience. So how do we escape that perfectionism trap?
It starts with realizing that being imperfect is not only normal, it's actually necessary. It's what makes us human. It's what lets us grow and learn.
So instead of beating ourselves up for messing up, we should see it as a chance to learn and get better.
Exactly. And remember, the people you're talking to aren't expecting perfection. They're looking for authenticity, for connection, for someone who's real and relatable.
It's like that saying, people don't connect with perfection, they connect with vulnerability.
That's it. And when you accept imperfection, you give yourself permission to relax, to be yourself, and to enjoy communicating.
This has been such a helpful conversation. I feel like I have a whole new toolbox for dealing with my communication anxiety and becoming a more confident and effective communicator.
And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. You'll have good days and bad days, times when you feel confident and times when you doubt yourself. But the important thing is to keep practicing, keep learning, and keep embracing those jitters as a sign that you care.
That's such a great point. Listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge and motivation you need to approach your next communication challenge with confidence and authenticity. Your voice matters, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into all kinds of interesting topics.